Hey guys, Sky here. We have Stormy here.
What's up?
So, if you guys haven't heard, Ubisoft and Netflix have signed an agreement on various Assassin's Creed projects going forward for the Netflix streaming platform. And basically, I guess the biggest of that news is that um, a Netflix live action Assassin's Creed series is being developed. Um, it will follow a lot of the iconic video game stories and world, and along with that, they'll also be doing an animated and anime series. Um, we don't really have much word on what that means and like how far they're gonna go into that, but I guess we'll see soon enough. Um, I don't. I mean, I think this is good news because I think Assassin's Creed it's one of those series that can work really well into live action if it's done well, and I think if it has Ubisoft behind like the show, then it works even better. Hopefully, because like they're the actual like developers of the whole series, and I mean, it's kind of a hard series and whole property to tackle because of how much timelines there are in the series throughout the games. Thoughts, Stormy?
As a OG fan of the Assassin's Creed series, especially 1 through 4, including the third remake, I feel like there's a lot of good ideas and bad ideas. As we saw with the old movie that flopped, um, what you shouldn't do is make an open universe with a closed story. And I think what they're probably going to end up doing, at least on speculation, is probably going with a new storyline and kind of making it somewhat connected with maybe another game or maybe like a future game. It would make more sense to me to, kind of have a new environment with maybe old faces or something like that. So it kind of gives the Creed feel because if you remember, I don't know how many games you've played of Assassin's Creed, but there are certain games that are way outshining than others. So those storylines are more popular, and more people would be able to understand kind of where they're coming from. Especially if, like, we don't even know the rating of this. We don't know like how long it would go. We don't know the timeline. Like, if they do the right timeline with the right rating, and they do a good job of it, especially with Ubisoft being on board, it could potentially be really, really good, and the story could be good as well. But that all depends on like if they choose to go off of a game, not off of a game, or completely new time.
Yeah, and also one other thing I wanted to point out is that this isn't Netflix's first time like tackling video game IPs. For example, the which I thought was very good. The Witcher series that came out last year. I thought that was really good, and I mean, if we can expect something like that type of sort of story driven show, then like I'm down for like whatever they're gonna do. And yeah, like what you were saying, I think the best two options, since we don't really know what they're planning on, since it's an early development, but I think it would be either to go like a new route, sort of, and whole new faces, like you were saying, and yeah, a whole new environment and setting. And since Assassin's Creed goes through like different historical time periods, it could like be a whole new time period that hasn't been tackled at all in the games. And I think that would work well. And like it could introduce a new game in the future after this new game that's about to come out, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I think it would work well. Also, another option is let's say the show is like one season, 8 episodes. I could see them also like kind of following the whole game, and maybe like the first season they could tackle like the first game in the series, and then season two could tackle another time period that has been already introduced in the series. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So I think it would be interesting if we saw like either like we were both saying a continued timeline or a new timeline off of a game. But what they need to do is establish what timeline is it out of the game. Because if you remember, the game is a game within the game. So like basically like you are an employee working for a game development company. Is that right? I forget what the
Yeah.
name. But each of those timelines out of the game have different like meanings because most of them are Templars. So what they'll need to do is establish, okay, we want this Assassin's Creed movie to be during this timeline, but out of the game timeline, we want it to be 2020 or whatever years they choose. And that's the most important. I think that's actually why the first movie failed because I'm pretty sure we didn't even get to experience that. It was an Assassin's Creed movie. Like, why are we not experiencing, you know, the
I
out
mean,
of game
yeah,
experience?
that movie was a big disappointment. And I kind of feel bad because I thought Michael Fassbender was a good casting choice. That was wasted. Like, I think he would have done well if the movie had an actual good plot. Like, do you think the casting was good?
I think the casting was good, but I think the plot was utter trash. I mean, we basically witnessed a random event with no storytelling and pretty much no plot other than what we were introduced to. And again, like we were saying, if they continued the new like show off of like a continuous timeline that already exists, we could have familiar faces but have a new environment because what they did in that movie was pretty much a flop before it even started.
Yeah, and I mean, also one last thing I wanted to touch is that I mean, if you're a fan of like the video game world, and you know that video game movies aren't really like they're not really good. I mean, in these past 10 years, even going back like to the Super Mario Brothers movie from like the 90s, video game movies haven't been that well, obviously, and I think Netflix has a lot of pressure in that sense because this is a series which is different than the movie because depending on the runtime, you can explore more in each episode, especially if it's like an 8 episode 1 hour each season. And I don't know, I feel like it's a challenge because I mean they were able to do it with The Witcher, but that was more leaned towards like the books that were already there before. So I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see.
So let's talk about what they shouldn't do. So for one, as we've already established, they shouldn't create a new environment just to have reused or rehashed characters. That's the first big one. So if you remember, kind of a good example, I guess, in this way is Ready Player One. How they did the game sequence to the real life sequence, like obviously within the movie. I think that would be more of an interesting take because obviously, again, each worker out of the game experience was tasked with different things to find different relics, etc. So it would be interesting, I think, if throughout the one season, however many they do, we maybe look at different perspectives for different like Creed members or even Templars, depending on what they chose to do. I mean, obviously, like I said, Assassin's Creed Rogue with Shay Cormac, that was like an interesting way of showing us like the Templar side, but not necessarily showing us that he was a Templar like out of context. Like there was context to it. There was a lot of stories. So like if they did do something like that, I think it would be really interesting for them to kind of go for it, because obviously, like we already established, the movie was just bad. The storyline for it was bad. They didn't give us the out of context, out of the game. They didn't give us plot. They didn't give us like any driven elements that other than the one character. I think that it's kind of important at this point that we kind of understand the timeline as well, because again, like we established, there's so many Creed timelines. I mean, 1800s, 1900s, Civil War. But like we're moving towards a point where I feel like that's going to become even more important unless they choose to do different timelines during different episodes. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, we don't know what they're gonna do with this series, but I mean, Netflix knows that they have a big IP on their hands and they're a big platform, so, like, if they mess it up, which they probably won't, but it's possible, then they're gonna get a lot of backlash, especially from fans of the game like you and me. So, like, I don't know what time period they would focus on, or if they would focus on different time periods. And yeah, like you were saying, the whole sort of going into the game aspect, like in Ready Player One, it should be done well so it feels believable and interesting. Because, like, the way they did it in the Assassin's Creed movie from like 3 years ago, I think it had potential, but it wasn't executed well. So that was another reason. I think the story like sort of didn't work. And yeah, I mean, it's just if they have a good screenwriter and a good director or multiple directors, I think it's going to be a good project. And it's great to see that all these projects we're getting, not just like Assassin's Creed, are sort of like being more of a reality and they're given sort of more like approaches like cinematic quality. So that's great. Um, Let us know what you guys think about all this news from Netflix about making a live action series on Assassin's Creed. Um, we think it's great news, but it could totally come out as a fail and a flop, but we'll see.